Welcome in to the Bobby Carpenter Show. And as always, we got a nice action-packed lineup here. Football season, well, the college season is over. NFL season is cruising towards the Super Bowls. That'll be going off in a couple of weeks. Getting some Buckeyes going in that game. Pretty exciting there. Finally, Michigan looks like Jim Harbaugh, his departure will be official now. And where do they turn? Where do they go? I'm going to be joined here for the next couple of months by my man Joshua Perry. Excited to have him on. He filled in for Schlegs, and Schlegs taking on a little bit of a different role, so he's going to be in and out. But he will be joining us today on the program. We have our tailgate talk, questions from the fans, which as always are one of our favorite things. You guys always want to know what's going on with the team, and I love to get the perspective of the things that you like to look at. So we want to get those answered for you. But want to start off with Joshua. Jim Harbaugh, it's official now. He will no longer be the coach of the Michigan Wolverines. He will be the coach of the Los Angeles Chargers. When you see this, I mean, did it seem inevitable to you when you saw it come down?
Oh man, I feel like for Jim Harbaugh, there was always a lot of pull to go back to the NFL. He had even mentioned that he had the Super Bowl itch. I think he's chasing a world championship at the professional level. And so, from that standpoint, it made a lot of sense. But when you start really looking at all of the factors that were in there, and especially the way that this thing kind of ended, I don't know if this had to be the route that Jim Harbaugh took. Michigan certainly felt like wanted him back, and we know on that last day they put the contract offer, said we'll make you the highest paid coach in college football. We'll put the escalators in there so you can maintain that status. We're going to give you some of the immunity that you're looking for, a 3-person arbitration panel, just in case you do run into some issues, so you can't get fired by one person. Go ahead.
I want to ask, because that's something that I think digging into it, you mentioned the immunity piece, the immunity clause, like, and just trying to understand that. I mean, you talk about this all the time. Obviously, we're, being at NBC and everything that goes on there with the Big Ten, the immunity clause. So this was for things in the past, things in the future. And then where was the idea that this tribunal, this is the first time that I've heard of that as far as rendering any punishment?
Yeah, so the immunity clause, I think, was very specific in terms of NCAA punishment relating to the 2 investigations that are ongoing right now. And I think he just wanted to feel like he was really being backed by his university. Is one of the things he always talked about. I want to feel like I'm in a place where I'm appreciated and supported and they've got my back. I think from an athletic department standpoint, it's really hard to throw out immunity because you got to protect your own interests. But you can make an argument that Jim Harbaugh being the head coach of Michigan might have been their best interest, regardless of whether he was serving a suspension or not. Now, this 3-person panel, you talk to some of the Michigan media people, and they try to make it sound like this isn't the most outlandish thing that they've ever heard of. And typically when they render punishment, it is something that has to go through multiple levels of people. The way that I see this, and I might be speaking out of turn, but it's the way that I see it, is there was a relationship between Jim Harbaugh and the athletic director for Michigan, Ward Manuel. They were college teammates, mind you, that had deteriorated to a point where Jim Harbaugh's like, that man is not going to be 100% in charge of my future. If you remember the reporting that was going on during the football season, they said that these two were communicating through intermediaries. And I don't know if you have ever heard of that when it comes to a head coach and an athletic director. It's wild to think that Ryan Day would approach Gene Smith through his guy, and Gene Smith sends a response through his guy. And that was what was being reported was going on in Ann Arbor. And so I do think that part of the reason why this ended the way that it did was because there was a level of tension between administration and Jim Harbaugh, and one person specifically in that administration, where he said, I don't know if I want to do this anymore, and I've got this dream I want to achieve in the NFL. It might just be the best possible outcome for me.
They always say, Joshua, my people talk, your people talk to my people. And maybe
Yeah.
that's the big Hollywood thing. He's out there in California, want to get back to it. Because reach out to me, and I'm not going to actually talk to you. And I always forget the piece, and I'm glad that you brought this up, that Ward Manuel, like, he's just not some guy that they brought in. Like, he's a Michigan man as well.
He's one of their own.
And I forgot that him and Harbaugh were teammates. Like, that to me is like the most peculiar part about all this. Is I knew about the frostiness of the relationship, but I can't imagine a guy who played with you, both played under Bo. You kind of have a shared vision. You should be fairly equally invested given like your ties to university. It just is utterly befuddling to me that all this stuff that was reported that really got to that point.
It'd be like Cardale Jones being the head coach of Ohio State, and I'm the athletic director, and we don't talk to each other directly. That's crazy to think about.
When you say it like that, I had forgotten that they were teammates, and that to me, like you said, it just you would think that they would have a shared common vision. I knew that the president, he was involved in some of this,
Yes.
but it seemed though, Joshua, to me, like Jim really wanted to be in the NFL more than Michigan.
Mhm.
And the fact that he was able to deliver that national championship, I wouldn't say gave him the out, but hey, I beat Ohio State 3 years in a row. I kind of
Right.
tied the tourniquet off on the hemorrhaging that was going on. We got us in the right direction. And I've served, I want to say like time served, but it seems almost like I came here, I got this thing turned around in the right direction. Be thankful for that. And now I'm on my merry way.
Yeah, I think all of that factors in. Like, I think part of his goal when he came to Michigan was to return the program back to national prominence and to a place where he envisioned the program should be. I also remember his introductory press conference where he said that he has built cathedrals in his career, and he wanted to build a cathedral in Ann Arbor that could be a permanent home. And so this idea that he didn't have a desire to be in Ann Arbor for the long run, I think is a little bit faulty. And I mean, I think part of it, you go back to the COVID year and they asked him to take a pay cut, and whether you felt like that was right or wrong. We all know how ego is involved in some of these things.
Yep.
Probably felt like they were dragging their feet on doing an extension in the first place. We heard back in October, before Stallions was even a guy anybody was talking about, that they were in contract negotiations, and he went out of his way to talk about it in season. And he'll tell you that he's a one-track minded guy. Why is he talking about a contract? Because he probably felt disrespected about the timing that was going on. I think this is desire to be back in the NFL, absolutely. But it's bigger than that when it comes down to the decision that he made.
It's one thing I went back and I read that quote, and there's the famous line. Someone told me this, like, if you let people talk long enough, they'll generally tell you what they're thinking if you just literally open it up. But so oftentimes people now are just waiting for someone to get done so they can speak. And with Jim Harbaugh, what you said is wholly accurate. He talked about building these great cathedrals, and he's a builder by nature, wanted to build something permanent at Michigan, but also embedded in the middle of that, he talked about his desire to builders always see a new patch of land and
Right.
always want to try to build again. And you felt like there was maybe that little itch there that he was telling you was always going to be there. Yes, I want to build something great at Michigan. I want to do some awesome stuff. But in that same sense, you really can't change exactly what I am DNA wise and genetically and what I want to do. And he's a guy that runs a little hot. And I think he's going to do a great job with the Chargers, but he almost seems a little Bill Parcells where he comes in, he can do a great job, rubs a lot of people the wrong way, maybe has a shelf life, but he'll have it where you need it to be. But then at some point, you probably have to turn it over to someone else. That person looks like it's going to be Sherrone Moore. We're going to get into that because there's a lot more that we got to dive into with that. But we're going to take a quick break because up next, the guy that's usually on here with me, our guy Anthony Schlegel, going to join us, talk a little bit of some winter conditioning, Ohio State wrestling, what he sees needs to happen, all these different things. Played with me. He coached JP. It's going to be a lot of stuff in here that you're going to want to hear. We're getting to that next here on the Bobby Carpenter Show. Welcome back into the Bobby Carpenter Show, and guy who's been on this show with me for the last 4, 5, 6 months, however long we've been doing it, going to join us again. Got a little bit of a new role right now at Ohio State, so his time's going to be a little limited. But played with me, got to coach my guy JP, and giving the dance floor to my man, Mr. Anthony Schlegel.
No, hey, I mean, honestly, we're in the middle of winter conditioning, and I just remember, Bob, there was, and with social media and everything that's out there, and we're the sum of our life's experiences. And I go back to this one particular picture that was on, I don't know what it was on, Bucknuts, or it was on something, and we were doing a 6 a.m. workout, and there's you and me. There's actually a couple pictures. One, I was looking really terrible going through the agile bags, and I had my shirt off and I had my tats.
So fat.
And I was just straight off of a really hardcore diet of Bud Heavies and and chicken wings with extra ranch, and I could deadlift a crap ton. I could squat a crap ton, but man, I was not very agile. And there's another picture, the same workout where you and I are doing a wheelbarrow. And of course, you're amazing at it because you're a swimmer and you got long arms, and I'm carrying you and I'm kind of like yelling at you to keep your legs straight, but you're just freaking humming along. And man, I look terrible in that picture. And if those
So-
two things would have been like, if that would be 2024, they'd have been like, what the hell did we bring in here? I would have gotten
No.
ridiculed. I would have gotten ran out of town.
So what's amazing, our finishers, Joshua, with Tress, we would like pair up, and they like wouldn't let AJ do 6 a.m. workouts anymore because his knee was awful. It was like a 100-year-old man. So then Schlegs, we were partners. You partner up at the end, and we would do like 50 or 100 and back.
100 yards,
wheelbarrow,
yeah.
and then we'd do like buddy carries. And Fick told us that day, and it's great because all of us were coached by Fick in here. He's like, hey, media is going to be in here today. Leave your shirts on. Don't be looking foolish. So Schlegs doesn't listen, and I didn't listen either. Shirts come popped off. And so I'm literally, Schlegs, we're doing buddy carries. So I'm on his back. Like you would carry a child, like over his shoulder. You got your legs wrapped around their waist, and we don't have shirts on. And we're like two dudes just skin to skin. And I can hear like the squishing of the sweat. It's at the end of the deal. I'm laughing. Schlegs' gut looks like it's hanging out all over the place. And they snapped this picture on it. And dude, that was in the dispatch, Schlegs. I'm almost positive.
Okay.
Because this is no joke. Then the next year, or no, it was early. That was in my sophomore year. I start dating my wife like the next year. That picture is on their fridge, and they had put like her and one of her roommates' friends over top of our faces. It was her and her friend carrying each other. I'm like, I walk in there, I'm like, you got to be kidding me. And she's like, what? And she hadn't seen it in so long that she didn't even realize it was me. And then meeting this guy over there, it was unreal. It was a terrible looking picture. And I'm going to be honest with you, that's the last time that I've ever had a dude's skin just like pressed against my chest because it was the most awkward thing in the world. He was so sweaty too.
We can replicate that. Now we look way better though, at least, you know?
That is hilarious. Schlegs, you remember my freshman year?
Oh, bro, I trust me. I vividly remember your freshman.
I do too. I cannot forget it.
That's why I love you so much. Like,
yeah.
That's why we coach. You're the reason we coach.
You're the reason we coach.
No, I am. I was a project. So you remember how Bobby used to come in and he would jump in on the workouts. And so we were doing tire pulls the one day, and Bobby was just over there kicking my behind, calling me a soft 270 outer belt kid. And I remember it was great because Schlegs, as tough as he was a guy you could go to after the workout, and he would just tell you the truth about everything that's going on. Keep your head down, keep working, and don't listen to Bobby because he's crazy.
and you know, that's we all need that, right? We all need the friction. We all need truth. You know, that's what helps us grow. But those are the memories that you remember with your teammates and the growth that you had, and then you knew what to expect the next year, and now your role changed, Joshua, and like you start to become a leader. Then you also have John Simon pushing you, just like you might have beat John on the first round, right? And then like John's just like running back and hops right back in until he just, you know, starts beating you to the ground. And you're like, no mas, and then on to the next. And I'm just trying to encourage you, like, just keep going, just keep going, just keep going. And then all of a sudden now it's your senior year, and now you're doing that, right? That's the maturity. And you know, the beautiful thing is, I see, right, from where you came from when you came as a freshman, and then to when you graduated. And we always believe that you can train toughness, but you had to make the choice to be tough. And then now you're that alpha, and that was developed into you. But then once you get out of ball, the alphaness doesn't leave you. Those memories and those, you know, the trials and tribulations you went through don't leave you. You just hone that alphaness into a different direction, which you do now in the media, and Bob does now in the media, and or they do it in business, right? And we have a lot of guys that have taken that and driven it into other areas. And that's the beauty of college athletics that I don't think a lot of people see, but it's probably the most rewarding thing as a player, but more importantly, as a coach, when you see it. And those are the things that you remember. And it's also the reasons why you coach.
Yeah, Schlegs, I got to tell you, I may have hated some of those workouts. I hated getting up early and getting yelled at and having to go against John Simon, who was going to run me into submission. But
Yes.
to your point, I do not regret, and I appreciate every single one of those moments, because you get out into the real world and you start to realize these people are not like me. Like I have gained an advantage in life because I went through all of those things. So to your point, you can train the toughness, and the guys take it with them. Like it literally, it changes lives. I would not be the type of person I am, the confidence that I have, the ability to work that I have, if it wasn't for spending time with you guys teaching us how to do that.
And that's the one thing that Mick is amazing at. You know, he has something on the board, and that's what you guys listen to. I mean, he's the best. And you know, it's fun to watch him in his element. But it's something that's really special, and you don't really see it when you're in the weeds of it, right? Because you need to just stay in the weeds. Like there doesn't need to be a light at the end of the tunnel. I got to go be great every single day, but you just got to embrace it. You got to cherish it, knowing what it's going to allow you to do, not only down the road of this season, but also in life. That's a super fun thing.
Well, what's interesting is both of you guys touched on that, and Joshua, you talked about how hard it was early in your career, and then it gets easier, and the workouts really don't get any easier. It's just amazing of your perception of what you're about to do, and like your ability to prepare and emotionally control and regulate. Like I coach, my 10-year-old kid. Schlegs has older kids. Joshua, I mean, you're going to be, embarking on fatherhood here soon. And it's gotten significantly worse because kids they don't play outside anymore. They don't have like these tough games where like, dude, you might be 2 years younger than the next kid, any of the kids you're playing with on the field or the court or whatever it is. And so like, if you cry about getting fouled, they're just going to tell you to go home. Like, and you've just got to deal with hard stuff. And so I'm looking at the emotional regulation of our kids, of how they're able to do this. And it's really no different than when they get to the college level, when you're trying to figure out, like, guys, prepare yourself mentally for a very difficult situation. And then once you get through it and you survive it, like, okay, you've kind of like built that layer of toughness, like the calluses that are on your hands, that becomes the callus your mind. And at some point, like in your life, Josh, like even if you haven't done this, and Schlegs, like you may not have done these workouts for a long time, but like, hey, if you give me a week or two to get in shape, I could get good enough shape that I could go do that, because I know that I can physically survive it. And so I'm not worried about literally killing me. Because when you're young, you feel like this might actually kill me. This could end
I'm
my
gonna
life.
die today. Yeah.
Yes, I'm gonna die today.
It's the best. It's the best.
It's really good stuff. And so, with that, like the mental aspect of it, and you want to get into this because Ohio State had a huge victory over Michigan in wrestling, which,
Yes.
it's tough. I mean, Big Ten's one of the best wrestling conferences you're going to find. And Joshua was a BTN for a long time. They cover that, everything. But that was a big win. Talk a little bit about Coach Tom Ryan and the wrestling squad they were able to get done.
Yeah, huge win. I think they were down 3 starters in this, and right out the gate they're down 9, and then they kind of came back, and then they're down 10, and huge win by Rogotetsky. I want to say that's his name, but he had a win over number 14 Bullock. That really brought the match back into reach. It was 19-14 Michigan. And then, who was it? Let's see. Feldman had a great performance, beat Lucas Davidson, who's number 4 in the country, beat him 5-4. Buckeyes end up winning 2019. And it's the first time they've beaten Michigan, that team up north, in Columbus since 2012. So that's huge. Right now, they're 17th in the nation. Michigan's 11th, but what a great win in a packed house. And you can really see Tom Ryan's reach here in Columbus, Ohio, and in the state of Ohio for wrestling. He does a phenomenal job, and just tip of the cap to the Buckeyes getting her done at the Cavelli.
Absolutely. Well, Schlegs, we appreciate some time today. I know you got to go get back training, get that flannel on, get some Carhartt on, and go do some Carhartt things. Up next, Joshua and I, we're going to get in a little bit more of this Sherrone Moore hiring, what that means for Michigan, what it means for Ryan Day, and how this can impact the rivalry moving forward. We got that coming up here next, right here on the Bobby Carpenter Show. Welcome back into the Bobby Carpenter Show. Our guy Schlegs running around his farm somewhere in Southern Ohio, training dudes and mowing grass, whatever the heck he's doing. But Michigan, Sherrone Moore looking to be their new head coach, keeping that in-house Joshua, you watched Ohio State do that with Ryan Day, and everybody said that was, the greatest decision early on. And now some people are saying, well, now it wasn't as good a decision. You couldn't have a national search. And it's interesting now because it's a very similar situation with Sherrone Moore, who coached a couple games for Jim Harbaugh, just like Ryan Day did for Urban Meyer. And he looks to be taking over. And he did a great job in-game coaching. But as you know, that's part of it. Running a program on a day-to-day basis is a much bigger task. And so this will be his first head coaching job, if I'm not mistaken. And, kind of your thoughts on where you think this is going.
Yeah, my initial reaction was exactly what you just talked about. The news broke late Friday that they were going to make Sherrone Moore the full-time head coach of the University of Michigan. I was on air on TV, and we had Jake Butt, Michigan tight end, two-time All-American Mackey Award winner, in studio with us. And so it was great. We got to talk about it. And the one thing that I mentioned in that is similar thing happened with Ohio State. You have Ryan Day, who is the interim coach, beginning of the year, had a top 15 win down in Texas against TCU, felt like the right decision. Gets his career started off 13-0 regular season, his first year as head coach in 2019 with a win over Michigan. 2020 in the COVID abbreviated year, made it to a national title game, felt like it was a home run. And I think the thing that we fail to realize with first-time head coaches is there is a learning curve. And as well as Sherrone Moore did, and this is not to knock him, he wasn't the full-time coach during the week. Jim Harbaugh was allowed to coach during the week and to game plan and to do what he does to motivate his team. And there are going to be some things that Sherrone has to learn on the job. I think that he is a wonderful coach. I also think that there is a learning curve. And we've seen this with Kirby Smart. And, he got his career started off well, but it took a little while before the championship started rolling in there. We talk about Dan Lanning as like the, next great head coach on his way. People don't realize Dan Lanning is 1-4 against his rivals. Really good coach. Some of the big games hasn't been as good for him, right? We look at Ryan Day, and I mentioned all the success that he had in the beginning of his tenure. And then you look at the last few years, and of course there was a CFP berth in there, but it's 3 straight losses to Michigan. And in the past, coaches got to learn and make mistakes at places like Bowling Green and San Jose State and North Texas. And nowadays we're watching these guys learn on the job at places like Oregon, Ohio State, Michigan, and Georgia. So probably some patience if you're a Michigan fan, because he's going to look like a young coach at times. But I do think this is a wonderful hire. It keeps continuity. I think he's the right type of guy to lead the Wolverines.
Yeah, what's interesting, and you mentioned Kirby Smart, and even though he's got the pair of national championships, his record against Saban still isn't very good. Like there's a hurdle there. And another team that you could even throw in here, first-time head coach, Notre Dame with Marcus Freeman. Our guy. Like it's kind of the first time you feel like a lot of these big blue-bloodish programs are hiring first-time head coaches, because usually it's the prerequisite is having success somewhere else. And not saying that what they did isn't right, and because you got to look at them all individually, but you said there's going to be some issues. And right now, especially with how dynamic college sports are and the changes all over the place, I don't know if anybody really has like a firm handle on maybe what it's going on or what it actually is going to be on a day-to-day basis. And they're trying to clean that up and trying to fix it, but obviously still a lot of uncertainty there. And as we look at this a little bit, one of the big pieces of being a head coach, Joshua, is your staff.
Sure.
And so it looks like Jesse Minter is going to be going to the Chargers with Jim Harbaugh, probably his son Jay. But do we think a lot of the rest of the staff is going to stay there? And how do you think that impacts everything?
I think they'll be able to keep a lot of the staff. Like, you look at Mike Hart, he's a Michigan man. They probably got him locked down. Elston coaching the defensive front there. He's a Michigan man as well. It seems like Clinkscale is a guy who wants to stay, potentially could step into that DC role there. But I do think the losses on the staff are going to be big. You talk about Jay Harbaugh. Not only was he coaching the secondary, he was heavily involved in special teams. And you mentioned Jesse Minter there. He's one of the best coordinators in the country. Had led a Michigan defense that I don't think a lot of people realize, one of the best defenses we've seen in last decade of college football or so. And so they're going to have answers for that. And I think one of the hard things, and we see it both in the NFL and on the college level, is when you are a first-time head coach, but specifically when you're a young coach, a guy in his 30s, what does your network really look like? Like, of course, you can try to attract people with the brand and with the money, which is what they're going to do. But like, knowing guys and being really familiar with guys and knowing how they coach on a day-to-day basis. You haven't been around football quite long enough to really understand that. And so I think that's another one of those things that they'll run into. But make no doubt about it, I know Sherrone Moore has been planning for an opportunity like this, so he's going to try to roll out the best that he has. But certainly some big losses. And we even get to the roster where JJ McCarthy, you got to replace. Donovan Edwards, you got to Blake Corum, you got to replace. A lot of that offensive line. They've got some good pieces coming back on defense, no doubt, but the linebacker room's a little bit of a question. Certainly a lot of things in flux there.
Yeah, that's I know that was one of the things that Ryan Day, that just the network, when you've only been at a couple of different staffs, knowing guys, and it's one thing for there to be great coaches out there, but this coaches a little bit incestual. A lot of times they want to bring in guys who they know, who they're familiar with. And so you've had to have coached with those guys. And if you've only been on 2 or 3 staffs, it's hard to kind of have that broad network and find all of those different people for different position groups. And hey, you may know 10 great offensive coaches, but if you need a defensive backs coach, well, that's not really going to help you locate that guy and make sure you've got the right person. So we'll get into a whole lot more of that. There's a lot of things that we can obviously screw down this offseason about how that staff looks and what Michigan's doing. But up next, we've got some big news here. The foundation, some of the NIL components, collectives. How is that looking in Columbus? And a former Buckeye getting involved in a big way, and a bit more college gambling news, which may not always be great for the schools involved. We got that next here on the Bobby Carpenter Show. All right, welcome back into the Bobby Carpenter Show, and some good news here for Ohio State. Signed a big class out of high school, big portal class, retained a lot of players with that. There's going to be NIL expectations and NIL bills that need to be paid. The foundation, one of the collectives, made a note that fans had donated over $500,000 to the foundation. Joshua, I think this is what people were kind of looking at, where, hey, people may not want to talk about NIL. You may not necessarily like it, but the reality is, it's been 3 years since you beat Michigan, came close to beating Georgia, and maybe we're on the footsteps of a national championship, but it seems like people are getting a little restless. And I think this maybe inspired Buckeye Nation, which is one of the biggest fan bases around, to maybe get involved as much as they can.
Yeah, and I think the foundation said that they were going to match the contributions that they got there. So, $1 million raised is a hell of a deal. I know 1870's been putting in the work there too. This is what needed to happen. And I think there are a number of factors that went into it. I think that you mentioned a lot of important ones. It's hard for me to say that watching your rival do what they did this past year isn't a motivator. And they were a team that brought in 9 transfers last year and had a push from their collective to bring guys back. They were a super veteran team, and I think that really mattered for them. But for Ohio State, I always thought the question was, when was it going to get aligned the way that it needed to? Because I think we all understood that through Buckeye Nation, there was going to be the power to raise money the way that they have, and to be able to leverage that into the recruiting successes that they're looking for, and the rewards for the current players on the roster too, which I think might be a more important factor than what you do necessarily just to get guys in the door. And here we are. People have stepped up, certainly, and I think it's going to make a huge difference for the Buckeyes in the long run.
One of the guys stepping up, former Buckeye quarterback CJ Stroud. They announced, with a foundation did, that he is, I want to say, in the platinum level, which means he's donated between $50,000 and $100,000. CJ, a rookie, obviously having a lot of success in the NFL, but you hear the passion that he has for the school, the passion that he has for the program, and his desire to give back. I think that speaks volumes to what the culture is in a time, Joshua, where there was a lot of people maybe questioning what that Buckeye culture was under Ryan Day.
Well, and it's interesting too, because this is a guy who was developed by Ryan Day. And so obviously he is a believer. And I think that we could point to some of the guys that came back that would say that they're believers in what Ryan Day is building too. But you mentioned the culture and you mentioned the brotherhood and all of those things. I think it's really important. Also, CJ Stroud has been a remarkable guy, and he went through hell at times at Ohio State with some of the criticism that he took. And I don't think a lot of it was on him. But to say that he was going to make a financial investment, and certainly he's fortunate to be a guy who can make an investment and contribution of that level, I think it really shows what this program develops in terms of people and how they feel about where they came from. And I think this can be an example as well to other guys who are maybe thinking about getting involved and want to be involved in their alma mater. And it's like, well, you know, the offensive rookie of the year, one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL as of right now, decided that he wants to jump on board. You know, you might get a couple other guys to get involved as well.
Absolutely. And it's tremendous to see. And like you said, CJ, for as much criticism that maybe he took at Ohio State for, not running or this, not being Justin Fields, whatever it is, like everybody had their own narrative, him getting involved and wanting to contribute back. Fantastic. Another guy who wanted to get involved with his team in a big way, Kayshon Boutte, former LSU Tiger.
A
And
hell of a transition there, Bobby.
well, hey, the guy, hey, my man Anthony Rothman, who I used to,
Love
co-host
that guy.
with, he loved to play GM in these conversations when we were doing contract battles, and he loved Joshua to slap the franchise tag on guys. And I said, you would be the most hated GM in all of the NFL. He goes, bet on yourself. You get a lot of money, you get a chance for a bigger payday. Well, Kayshon Boutte took that literally. He wanted to double down, placed 8,900 bets over about a year and a half span. Some of those on LSU games.
Sure.
And what we know, they were all on the positive side, but he even got himself, Joshua, in some different prop bets where I think against Florida State 2 years ago.
He had
like a
over
5-catch.
82 and a half receiving yards and an anytime touchdown. My man had 2 for 20 and no tutters.
And they showed the video of him like late in the game walking on the field at tears in his eyes. I'm like, hey, people want to say that it doesn't mean a lot to these guys. I mean, he's going all in, Joshua, on trying to make sure it matters.
I don't think we should be laughing about this, Bobby.
Well, I mean, I talked to my guy Jacob Hester about it, and he's like, you know what? At least he's betting on himself to win. There was no accusation of throwing games, but it's a serious deal. We laugh at it, but the reality is now with the geofencing and their ability to control IP addresses, and the fact that I think his 2 screen names included his actual name, if I'm not mistaken, they're going to find out if you're doing this or not.
Unfortunate for him. The number 8,900 in terms of the amount of wagers that he made, this is problematic. And I know that sometimes when you hear the betting ads, people kind of roll their eyes when they do the 1-800-GAMBLER thing. And it's like, this is a real issue. And I think when you're a player who is willing to jeopardize their career and put a lot of money up to make these bets, it's a little bit crazy to watch. So hopefully he finds the help that he needs here, because this is wild. I did not think that we were going to see something of this magnitude, but here we are.
Yeah, it's one thing, you see guys place some bets here, there, tens, maybe 50, 100, but I mean, 8,900, it's a lot. And so this is also, I mean, we're talking about federal crimes and everything else. So
my man put $132,000 in his account.
Yeah, it's a lot. We're talking about big numbers, and he's definitely going hard or going home. And he's going to be dealing with a lot of things, and hopefully he gets this stuff under control. And he's obviously going to get in some trouble with some of the criminal charges that are obviously going to follow this as well. So hopefully this is contained and we see less and less of this moving forward. But up next, we've got Tailgate Talk, where we answer your questions that are thrown out here. There's some good ones, and those will all be next right here on the Bobby Carpenter Show. Welcome back into the Bobby Carpenter Show, and excited for the Tailgate Talk. It's one of our favorite segments. We answer your questions that you get to us here on Twitter. It's fantastic, as we love to really get to know what you're thinking, find a way to answer all of the pressing thoughts and concerns you may have about Buckeye football and college football in general. And Josh, I want to throw the first question out here, coming to us from Kevin White. And the guy we had on earlier, guy who hosts this show with me a lot, Mr. Anthony Schlegel. It's about him. It's what is Schleg's number one priority moving forward in this role. And so he's going to be, working with the strength program with the team here this offseason through winter conditioning and spring ball, most likely. And when you see that, you were a guy who was coached by him in that same role. What does he bring to the table, and what would you like to see happen?
He's a grit guy, and I think you and I both know that. Like, background in wrestling, he's a dude who wants to get down and dirty. I had watched him get involved in some of these workouts, like, showing guys how it's done. So I think that is something that he brings. He knows how to be combative as well, and I think that is a skill where you can push guys and back them into a corner and really see how they want to fight. And so I love that aspect of him. But I mentioned this a little bit earlier when talking to, we were talking to Schlegs, but he is a lover at heart, right? Like, he's a guy who is about brotherhood, and he's a guy who has Christian values, and so he really exudes love. And I think when you're trying to coach people and be real with people and be hard on people, it's much easier to do that when that person knows that you love them. And so Schlegs is going to be able to go there with guys in a way that he can connect quickly. And I think it's awesome. And he's somebody who came up through this program. He gave back to this program before. And so it's a great fit as a stopgap type of option. I'm super excited for him.
Yeah, I think it's great. And people have talked about, the toughness element of that. And what you said, I mean, Schlegs is about as tough a coach as you're going to have, but he's the guy with the biggest heart. He can be both combative and caring, like in the same session that you're together. And it's awesome to see him challenge some of these guys. Because part of it, you got to be a physically imposing dude. And Schlegs isn't afraid. He literally isn't afraid of anyone, which is key. But then at the same point, he'll put his arm around you afterwards, like, hey, this is what you need to do to get better. Let me help you do these things. And it's such a big piece. Watching him work with you, is fantastic, and how he's shaped and molded you, and how he can do that to a lot of guys. I think it will be massive, for him being back involved with the program, and just, and part of it too, Joshua, and we'll just throw this out. When you play at Ohio State and you have that connection to the program, I think there is a little bit of an element that allows you to connect to those players, knowing that you've been in that role before.
You tell them I sat in this room. I understand the slings and the arrows and the criticisms, and I also understand when people say that they love you and when you're on top, but it's never real. And to hear that from somebody who literally sat in the same rooms that you sit in, I think holds a ton of value. He can give the real perspective about being a guy who played in the program, and it resonates with all the guys around him.
It's fantastic. One of the other questions coming in here, we start talking about, the numbers that were floated out, and when it comes to NIL, and this is also coming from Kevin, it's a pretty good question too. Ryan Day had alluded, I think maybe last year, telling people it's about $13 million to maintain or retain, the roster. You look at what they were able to do with a lot of guys coming back, obviously did well in high school recruiting, getting a quarterback in the transfer portal, 2 quarterbacks, actually, the freshman and a senior, Howard and Sayin. You bring in, an unbelievable running back in there as well. You bring in some offensive linemen, like just a lot of players. And then, I saw float out, maybe $10 million. I think that it could be probably even maybe more than that 13 number if you start doing some hard math. And the question was, do you think that's an all-in number? Is this a yearly figure when you start looking at some of these things?
I can tell you from what I know, and I know you've probably had conversations as well, is some of the guys that you got to bring in are going to come at a high price tag, and somewhere in 7-figure range. And it seems kind of wild when I consider what my professional career looked like. Never made that much money in a singular year. Neither here nor there. I'm doing fine, people. But you also look at the rest of the roster, and you've got guys that are 25,000 guys, and that's what they're going to make, and that's all they're going to get. And so I think that there is a top end in college football that will command a 7-figure type of number. When you're at Ohio State, you may have more of those top ends and some of the other programs around. The thing that I do know is you also hear coaches like Kyle Whittingham at Utah saying that $7 million gets them a championship in the Big 12. So this is not a unique thing of coaches saying the dollar figure that they need for their program to be successful. Winning a Big 12 championship, certainly different than Ohio State trying to win the Big 10 and go on a run and win a national title. It might cost a little bit more money to do that, but with some of the returners that they had, certainly those guys come at a price, and some of the guys they pursued in the portal, they're gonna, when they get on campus, ask for a little bit of money. But I look at the bulk of the roster, and you're probably looking at anywhere between 25K, 50K up to 100K, but not a ton of guys that are, in the $500,000 and up club. It's a private club that many cannot get into.
It is. It's a club that I'd like to have gotten into, Joshua. It sounds pretty
Me
good.
too.
For those guys, you start, like you say, you mentioned some of these guys and what you made in the NFL. I think league minimum now for rookies is 700 grand, which is pretty good, but
Pretty damn good.
these
I
guys are
didn't
getting
get it.
that now. Play another year of college football. So kudos to them. Try not to hate on it. Last question here coming from Mitchell. What do you think the most important thing Bill O'Brien will bring to this Buckeye offense from his NFL experience? And I'll even heck say, from his time at Bama and Penn State prior as well.
If you know about Bill O'Brien, one thing that you know about him is he's going to say it how it is. He is going to deliver the message the way that he needs to deliver it for it to be felt. You could see the way that he communicated with Tom Brady at times, felt like, hey, you going to talk to the GOAT like that? And he's like, yes, I'm going to talk to the GOAT like that because I'm his coach and that's my job. To willingly work for two guys, at Bill Belichick and Nick Saban, you got to have tough skin and you probably got to be willing to get into it in the coaches meetings. That's something that he's going to bring, but also a really good offensive mind, a good developer. So things I think he brings, number one, he's going to challenge. And I think that's important to have in the program. But number two, he's a former head coach in college and in the NFL who's going to be able to bring wisdom to Ryan Day in those situations where he may have a question. I think it's really important for guys to build a staff like that, especially considering that Ryan Day has been a head coach for, half a decade, not a super long time compared to some other guys in the game.
Yeah, as we talked about those first-time head coaches and some of the issues and struggles, Dan Lanning, Marcus Freeman, guys who we know, Kirby Smart, having a veteran guy on their staff, really big, someone you can lean in, and also someone who can be honest. Bill O'Brien, I think, has a lot of that Anthony Schlegel, maybe a little bit combative at times, but he's going to be brutally honest, which is what you ultimately need as well. So that is fantastic. Excited for that. Questions are always great. Heck, I told JP we may do like an entire question show sometime because they'll fire
Yeah.
away. Buckeye Nation's knowledgeable. They want their questions answered. They want to hear the truth. So we'll try to give them that. But coming up, we'll wrap up the program, get some parting thoughts here before we get out of the Bobby Carpenter Show here, right here on the Big Play Network. Welcome back in. Final segment here of the program. Next week, we're going to have Joshua back. We've got some ESPN way too early rankings that we haven't had time to get into. There's been so much Buckeye news, and we can keep talking about the structure of the team, who's going to be potential, impact players this year, how this defense could potentially look as well. But it's nice, Josh, we get a chance to sit there and talk to our boy Schlegs, and you get to cruise down nostalgia lane with him about his fortification for you as a man.
Yeah, I feel like you were a part of that process too. I told the story about the tire pulls. Bobby made it his life's work my freshman year to come in as many times as possible and to tell me that I was a soft suburban kid and I needed to toughen up if I was going to be a real linebacker at The Ohio State University. I appreciate the both of you guys.
Well, thank you. And there's one thing I always say, like your legacy when you leave isn't necessarily what you did on the field. I go, what does the room look like when you depart? Like, were you able to build something, a togetherness, and you were there with Raekwon, like build something in that room that's special? Ohio State, like especially the linebacker room, there's a lot of that. And heck, we can talk at length about this, but it was, conversation I was having with some, the veteran wideouts, like, hey, you guys have done this. You don't want to let this thing fall apart. And so it's big. And I was proud to see the way you guys were able to get that done. So super pumped to have you with us here, Joshua, for a while and get you dropping in. We'll have Schlegs kind of popped in throughout and smattered around. So he's doing a lot of stuff and helping to maybe train some of those young guys. So thank you again, Joshua. Thank you for tuning into this edition of the Bobby Carpenter Show right here on the Big Play Network.